2:15 in the morning. The Strait of Hormuz. The USS Albany was dying in the dark. A catastrophic failure in the main reduction gears had turned the nuclear-powered attack submarine into a 7,000-ton drift log. This was not a routine transit. Every second spent dead in the water brought the billion-dollar vessel closer to an international incident. The question was no longer about the secret mission in the Gulf. It was about whether the crew could restore auxiliary power before the prevailing currents pushed them into the jagged coastline of Iran. The silence inside the hull was absolute. For weeks, the steady hum of the steam turbines had been the heartbeat of the ship. Now, that heartbeat had stopped. In the engineering spaces, the temperature began to rise immediately. The humid air of the Middle East seemed to seep through the thick steel skin of the boat. Sweat beaded on the foreheads of the nuclear technicians. They worked by the dim, haunting glow of emergency red lighting. The Master Chief of the Watch looked at the shattered remains of the drive assembly. He had spent 20 years under the sea. He had never seen a failure this complete. The gears were fused into a solid mass of heated alloy. He keyed his headset to reach the command center. The Master Chief spoke to the control room. Bridge. Engineering. We have a catastrophic mechanical failure. The main reduction gears are non-functional. We are dead in the water. Commander Robert Vance stood at the periscope pedestal in the darkened control room. He felt the ship wallow in the heavy swells of the narrow strait. Without forward motion, a submarine is just a steel tube at the mercy of the ocean. He looked at the digital chart. A small green icon represented his ship. A solid red line marked the maritime boundary. The Albany was currently 2 miles inside that line. The current was pushing them deeper into the restricted zone at 3 knots. Commander Vance responded. Engineering. Bridge. Acknowledge the casualty. What is our status on the secondary propulsion motor? The Master Chief replied, negative. The seizure in the main gears has locked the drive shaft. The auxiliary motor cannot turn the propeller. We are stationary. Vance turned to his navigator. The man was pale in the red light. They were drifting toward one of the most heavily defended coastlines in the world. To stay submerged, they needed speed to maintain depth. Without speed, they would eventually sink or be forced to the surface. Officer of the deck, Vance said. His voice was steady despite the crisis. Prepare to snorkel. We need the emergency diesel generator online. We need power for the cooling systems and the air scrubbers. The officer of the deck hesitated. Sir, if we raise the snorkel mast, we will have a massive radar cross-section. We are very close to the Iranian shore. Vance did not look away from the chart. The alternative is a dead boat on the rocks. Raise the mast. Get the diesel started. Outside, the black waters of the Gulf were choppy. A long, cylindrical metal mast broke the surface of the sea. It looked like a finger pointing at the moon. The valve at the top opened with a hiss. It began to suck in the humid night air. Seconds later, the heavy thrum of the diesel engine vibrated through the hull. It was loud. To a sonar operator, the sound was like a bell ringing in a silent library. 6,000 feet above the water, a pilot adjusted his headset. He was flying an Iranian P-3 Orion. It was an old aircraft, but its sensors were well maintained. A small, sharp green dot appeared on his display. It was a stationary contact where no ship was supposed to be. The Iranian pilot spoke to his tactical coordinator. Contact, bearing 080, range 15 miles. It is a snorkel mast. The coordinator leaned forward. Confirm. There are no reported surface vessels in that sector. The pilot banked the heavy aircraft into a steep turn. Correct. It is a submarine. And it is in our waters. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 3:10 in the morning. The coastal airspace near Bandar Abbas. Major Hassan of the Iranian Air Force adjusted the brightness on his console. The P-3 Orion hummed around him. It was a reliable machine. His crew was tired. They had been patrolling the strait for 5 hours. The radar return from the surface was small. It was steady. It did not match the profile of a fishing dido or a merchant tanker. Hassan spoke to his crew. Maintain altitude at 3,000 feet. Tactical. Give me a classification on the contact at bearing 080. The tactical officer responded. Major, the radar cross-section is consistent with a submarine snorkel mast. It is not moving. It is drifting toward the coast. Hassan felt the weight of the moment. Finding a foreign submarine in territorial waters was a rare event. It was also a dangerous one. He knew the Americans often moved through the strait, but they stayed in the deep channels. They stayed in international waters. This vessel was far from the path. Hassan spoke again. Prepare to deploy a sono buoy. We need acoustic confirmation. If this is a nuclear boat, we will hear the cooling pumps. Inside the USS Albany, the mood was claustrophobic. The emergency diesel was a physical force. It vibrated the deck plates. It filled the air with a faint scent of exhaust that the scrubbers could not fully catch. In the sonar shack, Petty Officer Miller pressed his headphones closer to his ears. He heard the Orion before the radar mast detected it. The 4 turboprop engines of the aircraft had a distinct signature. Miller spoke to the command center. Bridge. Sonar. I have an aircraft overhead. Classification. P-3 Orion. It is circling our position. Commander Vance looked at the electronic support measures display. A jagged yellow line showed a high-frequency pulse. It was a search radar. They were being painted. Vance responded. Sonar. Bridge. Acknowledge. Can you confirm if they have dropped sensors? Miller listened. The ocean was a world of sound. He heard the splash. It was a sharp, metallic entry. Then came the high-pitched ping of an active sonobuoy. Miller replied. Bridge. Sonar. They have dropped an active buoy. It is 500 meters off the starboard bow. They know we are here, sir. Vance gripped the edge of the chart table. Being detected was the ultimate failure for a submarine commander, but being detected while disabled was a nightmare. He could not dive. He could not run. He was a sitting duck in a very small pond. Vance spoke to the room. The Iranians have a positive fix. Within 20 minutes, every fast boat in the Revolutionary Guard Navy will be heading for this coordinate. Officer of the deck. Radio. Send an encrypted burst to 5th Fleet. Report our position and our status. Tell them we are compromised. 3:30 in the morning. On the ground at Bandar Abbas, the Iranian Naval Command Center was a hive of activity. The report from Major Hassan had reached the highest level of the regional command. On a large wall-mounted screen, a red icon flashed. It was the Albany. The Iranian admiral looked at the screen. He was a man of calculated moves. He did not want a war, but he could not allow a foreign nuclear submarine to sit in his waters. It was a violation of sovereignty. It was an opportunity. The admiral spoke to his communications officer. Order the fast attack craft at Kish Island to intercept. Tell them to identify the vessel. They are to signal the submarine to surface and identify itself. If it does not comply, they are to maintain a perimeter and wait for my command. The officer responded, Admiral, should they arm their torpedoes? The admiral paused. They are to be ready for any provocation. This is our water. The world is watching. 100 miles away, the engines of 2 Abbas-class fast boats roared to life. They cut through the dark water like knives. 3:45 in the morning, the Persian Gulf. 2 Abbas-class fast attack craft sliced through the black water at 40 knots. Their engines screamed. Lieutenant Reza stood on the bridge of the lead boat. He looked at the infrared display. A heat signature was rising from the water ahead. It was the exhaust from the submarine's diesel generator. This was no longer a ghost on a radar screen. It was a physical presence in Iranian territory. It was a physical presence in Iranian territory. Reza spoke into his radio. Eagle 1, this is Guardian 1. I have a visual on the heat plume. The target is snorkeling. It is approximately 3 miles ahead. The commander at the shore station responded. Guardian 1, Eagle 1, confirm. You are authorized to close the distance. Do not fire unless fired upon, but you must make your presence known. Use your searchlights. Inside the USS Albany, the noise was a constant pressure. The sonar room was the only quiet space, but it was filled with the sounds of a closing trap. Petty Officer Miller adjusted the filters on his console. He could hear the high-pitched whine of high-speed propellers. They were moving much faster than the submarine could ever hope to drift. Miller spoke to the control room. Bridge. Sonar. I have 2 high-speed surface contacts. Bridge. Sonar. I have 2 high-speed surface contacts. Bearing 075. Range 6,000 yards and closing fast. Speed is estimated at 40 knots. These are fast attack craft. Speed is estimated at 40 knots. These are fast attack craft. Commander Vance felt the deck vibrate. The emergency diesel was still running. It was their only source of electricity, but it was also a beacon. If he shut it down, the boat would go dark. The air would grow foul. The cooling pumps for the reactor would stop. He had no choice but to keep the mast up. Vance spoke to the officer of the deck. Man the bridge. I want 2 lookouts on the sail with small arms. Non-lethal posture. We are a disabled vessel in distress. Non-lethal posture. We are a disabled vessel in distress. We need to communicate that clearly, the officer of the deck responded. Sir, if we put men on the sail, they will be exposed. Sir, if we put men on the sail, they will be exposed. Those fast boats carry heavy machine guns and anti-ship missiles. But we cannot look like we are hiding. Vance nodded. I know. But we cannot look like we are hiding. We are a United States Navy vessel. We are experiencing a propulsion casualty. We act professionally. We stay calm. 4:15 in the morning. The water around the Albany began to churn. The 2 Iranian boats arrived with a roar. They did not slow down until they were within 500 meters. Suddenly, the darkness was shattered. Powerful searchlights cut through the night. The white beams hit the Albany's snorkel mast and the small portion of the sail that broke the waves. The light was blinding. On the sail of the submarine, 2 American sailors squinted against the glare. They held their rifles across their chests. They did not aim them. Lieutenant Reza watched through binoculars from the deck of his fast boat. He could see the American flag painted on the side of the sail. He could see the numbers 68. This was a Los Angeles-class submarine, a hunter-killer. To see such a powerful machine helpless and drifting was surreal. Reza spoke into the loudhailer. His voice boomed across the water in English. United States submarine. You are in the territorial waters of the Islamic Republic of Iran. You are in violation of international law. State your intentions immediately. The sound echoed off the hull of the Albany. Inside, the crew heard the distorted voice. It was the sound of a crisis reaching the point of no return. Commander Vance picked up the internal handset. Radio. This is the captain. Open a bridge-to-bridge channel on the international hailing frequency. Radio. This is the captain. Open a bridge-to-bridge channel on the international hailing frequency. Tell them who we are. Tell them we are restricted in our ability to maneuver. The radio operator responded. Captain, 5th Fleet is on the line. They are ordering us to maintain silence while they negotiate with Tehran. They do not want us talking to the local commanders. Vance looked at the wall of his cabin. He could hear the Iranian boats circling. They were getting closer. He could hear the spray from their wakes hitting the sail. Vance spoke to himself. If we do not talk to them, they will think we are a threat. If we do talk to them, we might say the wrong thing. The Iranian boats began to tighten their circle. They were now less than 100 meters away. The situation was no longer a mechanical failure. It was a standoff. 4:20 in the morning. Manama, Bahrain. The headquarters of the United States Fifth Fleet was no longer a place of quiet night shifts. The Combat Power Center was alive with the low hum of voices and the glow of massive digital displays. Vice Admiral Sarah Jenkins stood at the center of the room. She stared at a single blue icon on the main screen. It was labeled Albany. It was sitting inside a shaded red area that marked Iranian territorial waters. The admiral spoke to her chief of staff. "Give me the latest burst from the boat." The chief of staff consulted his tablet. "Ma'am, the Albany reports a total propulsion failure. They are snorkeling to maintain power. They are being harassed by at least 2 Iranian fast attack craft. They have not engaged, but they are drifting toward the beach." Jenkins rubbed her eyes. This was the scenario every commander feared. A high-value nuclear asset was paralyzed in the backyard of a regional rival. Jenkins responded, "What is our nearest air support?" The chief of staff pointed to another icon. "We have 2 F-18 Super Hornets on a routine patrol over the northern Gulf. They are 20 minutes away. We also have a carrier strike group 6 hours to the south. Order the F-18s to orbit the area," Jenkins said, "but tell them to stay in international airspace. They are not to cross the 12-mile limit unless I give the word. I do not want to start a dogfight over a broken gearbox." 4:35 in the morning. Washington, District of Columbia. The sun had not yet risen over the Potomac River, but the lights were on in the White House Situation Room. The National Security Advisor sat at the head of the table. A secure video link showed the Pentagon and the State Department. The National Security Advisor spoke to the Secretary of Defense. "Mr. Secretary, how long until the Iranians try to board that submarine?" The Secretary of Defense looked at the live feed from a drone that had just arrived on station. "The fast boats are circling. They are waiting for orders from Tehran. If they see those sailors on the sail as a threat, they might act. If they realize the boat is truly disabled, they might try to attach a tow line. That is something we cannot allow." The National Security Advisor turned to the State Department representative. "Contact the Swiss. We need a message to Tehran immediately. Tell them the USS Albany is experiencing a mechanical emergency. Tell them we are requesting safe passage and assistance for a vessel in distress under international maritime law. Make it clear we are not there for a mission. We are there because we are broken." 4:45 in the morning. Tehran, Iran. Inside the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the telephone rang. The Swiss ambassador was calling on the emergency line. This was the back channel that had prevented dozens of wars over the decades. The Iranian foreign minister listened to the translation. He was a pragmatist. He knew that seizing a United States nuclear submarine would be a massive propaganda victory, but he also knew it would mean a full-scale war. The Americans would never let a nuclear reactor fall into foreign hands. They would sink the boat themselves before they let that happen. The minister spoke to his military liaison. "Contact the Naval Command in Bandar Abbas. Tell them the Americans are claiming a mechanical failure. Tell the fast boat commanders to maintain their positions. They are to observe. They are to record everything. But they are not to board. Not yet." The liaison responded. "The Revolutionary Guard commanders on the scene are aggressive. They see the American flag in their waters. They want to act." The minister narrowed his eyes. "Tell them they act on my order. Or the Admiral's order. No one else. The world is looking at that small patch of water." On the surface of the Strait of Hormuz, the tension was a physical weight. The Iranian boats continued their high-speed circles. The American sailors on the sail held their ground. Neither side knew that the leaders of their nations were talking. All they knew was that they were 50 meters apart, and both sides had their fingers on the trigger. 4:50 in the morning. The surface of the Strait of Hormuz. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and salt. On the narrow deck of the USS Albany, 4 sailors stood in the glare of the Iranian searchlights. They wore tactical vests and carried M4 rifles. They did not point the weapons. They kept them at the low-ready position. This was the most dangerous post in the Navy. They were standing on a billion-dollar nuclear reactor that could not move, surrounded by hostile forces. Commander Vance watched from the top of the bridge. The wind was picking up. The waves were beginning to crest with white foam. He could see the silhouettes of the Iranian sailors on the fast boats. They were less than 30 meters away now. He could see the heavy machine guns mounted on their bows. They were pointed directly at the Albany. The officer of the deck spoke to Vance. "Captain, the lead boat is slowing down. They are matching our drift speed. They are bringing a boarding ladder to the rail." Vance tightened his grip on the railing. Radio. "This is the captain. Direct broadcast to the lead boat. Tell them any attempt to board a United States sovereign vessel will be considered a hostile act. We will defend the ship," the radio operator responded. "Captain, they are ignoring our hails. They are broadcasting a pre-recorded message in English and Farsi. They are telling us to prepare for inspection." 5 o'clock in the morning, inside the Albany. The engineering team was exhausted. They had been working for 3 hours in a space that was now over 100 degrees. The humidity was staggering. The Master Chief looked at the secondary propulsion motor. It was a smaller electric motor designed for emergencies. Usually, it would be enough to get the boat to a safe harbor. But with the main gears fused, the propeller shaft was a dead weight. It would not budge. The Master Chief spoke to the control room. "Bridge. Engineering. We are attempting to use a hydraulic jack to force the shaft to turn. It is a slow process. We need more time." Vance heard the report. He did not have more time. 5:10 in the morning. On the Iranian-led boat, Lieutenant Reza was under immense pressure. He had received the order from the ministry to stay back, but his immediate superior on the shore was shouting into his ear. The local commander wanted a victory. He wanted to see the Iranian flag on an American sail. Reza spoke to his boarding team. "Prepare the grappling hooks. We will approach from the port side. If the Americans fire, you are to return fire with the heavy machine guns. Do not hesitate." His second-in-command looked at the American sailors. "Sir, they are not moving. They are like statues." Reza nodded. "They are professionals. We must be professionals too. But we must execute the order." 5:15 in the morning, the USS Albany. Commander Vance looked at the rules of engagement card in his hand. It was a laminated piece of paper that dictated when he could kill. The instructions were clear. He had the inherent right of self-defense. If an armed boarding party attempted to enter the pressure hull, he was authorized to use deadly force, but he knew that the first shot would lead to a rain of anti-ship missiles from the Iranian coast. It would be the end of his ship and his crew. Vance spoke to his security team. "Security, bridge. If they throw a line, do not cut it yet. If they attempt to step onto the hull, you are to use the high-intensity light strobes. Blind them. Do not fire unless they raise their weapons to a firing position. Is that understood?" The security lead responded. "Understood, Captain. Strobes ready. We are holding." The Iranian boat veered inward. The distance dropped to 10 meters. The roar of the engines was deafening. The two vessels were now so close that the wake of the fast boat was washing over the Albany's deck. The American sailors braced themselves against the cold water. The Iranian boat commander raised a megaphone. "We are coming aboard." Vance looked at the horizon. The first hint of dawn was a pale gray line, but the sky was not clearing. It was turning a strange, sickly yellow. The situation had reached its limit. Both sides were committed. 5:20 in the morning. The Strait of Hormuz. The lead Iranian fast boat, Guardian 1, surged forward. It was now less than 5 meters from the black steel hull of the USS Albany. The wake from the Iranian vessel slammed into the submarine's side. White water sprayed over the American security team. They wiped their eyes. They did not move. Their boots were locked into the non-skid surface of the deck. Lieutenant Reza stood at the rail of his boat. He held a steel grappling hook. He looked up at the American sailors on the sail. They were only 10 feet above him. Reza spoke to his crew. "Stand by. On my mark. Toss the lines." 5:21 in the morning. Inside the USS Albany. The Combat Information Center was a wall of noise. The radar warning receiver began a high-pitched, steady chirping. It was the sound of a land-based fire control radar. The electronic warfare officer spoke to the room. "Bridge. EW. We are being painted by a shore-based anti-ship missile battery. Classification: Silkworm. We have a steady lock. Commander Vance did not blink. Acknowledge. Deploy the acoustic decoys. If they fire, we have no movement to evade. We are a fixed target. 5:22 in the morning. The sonar shack. Petty Officer Miller pressed his palms against his headset. He heard a sharp, metallic clatter through the hull. It was the sound of a heavy objects hitting the side of the ship. Miller spoke to the bridge. Bridge. Sonar. I have mechanical impacts on the hull. Port side. They are throwing lines. I also have a new acoustic signature. The fast boats are flooding their torpedo tubes. I repeat, weapons are being armed. 5:23 in the morning. On the sail, the security lead saw the first rope fly through the air. The heavy iron hook caught the edge of the Albany's safety rail. It made a sickening metallic clang. A second hook followed, then a third. The ropes went taut as the Iranian boat backed off to tension the lines. The security lead spoke into his radio. Captain, they have secured lines to the hull. They are preparing to pull themselves across the gap. Orders. Vance looked down from the bridge. He saw the Iranian boarding party. They were wearing dark fatigues and balaclavas. They were armed with AK-47 rifles. One of them stepped onto the gunwale of the fast boat. He was preparing to jump. Vance spoke to his team. Security. Bridge. Activate the high-intensity strobes. Now, 5:24 in the morning. The surface. Suddenly, the darkness was shattered by a blinding, flickering white light. Two massive strobe units on the Albany began to pulse at 10 flashes per second. The effect was disorienting. It was designed to cause temporary blindness and nausea. The Iranian boarders shielded their eyes. They stumbled back from the rail. Lieutenant Reza fell to one knee. The light was like a physical punch to his brain. He could not see his own hands. Reza screamed over the roar of the engines. Fire a warning shot. Into the air. Now. 5:25 in the morning. The peak. A burst of tracer fire climbed into the yellowing sky. The sound of the heavy machine gun was like a hammer on the hull. The American security team dropped to one knee. They raised their M4 rifles to their shoulders. They centered their red dot sights on the chests of the Iranian boarding party. Inside the Albany, the weapons officer turned a key. Captain, I have a solution on the surface contacts. Vertical launch system is ready. We can take them out with harpoons. Vance looked at the display. He looked at the sailors on the sail. He looked at the tracer fire fading into the clouds. The world was seconds away from a kinetic engagement. The F-18 pilots were screaming for permission to dive. The Iranian missile batteries were one button press away from launch. The tension was a wire pulled until it was ready to snap. 5:31 in the morning. The Strait of Hormuz. The yellow sky did not break into a sunrise. It collapsed. A wall of sand and silt, 300 feet high, roared off the Iranian coastline. It was a Shamal. This was a seasonal dust storm that could turn a clear morning into a brown midnight in seconds. The wind speed jumped from 10 knots to 50 in a single heartbeat. The surface of the water was no longer visible. It was a churning mass of white foam and stinging grit. The Iranian boarding party vanished. One moment, they were poised on the rail of their fast boat. The next, they were swallowed by a cloud of dust so thick it felt like liquid. The high-intensity strobes on the USS Albany became useless. The light just reflected off the wall of sand, creating a blinding white fog that hid everything. Inside the Albany, the sound was like 1,000 hammers hitting the hull. The wind was screaming through the snorkel mast. The officer of the deck spoke to the room. Captain, visibility is 0. I have lost the security team on the sail. I cannot see the Iranian boats. Commander Vance gripped the periscope handles. He saw nothing but a swirling brown void. Security. Bridge. Report your status. The security lead responded over the radio. His voice was choked with dust. Captain, we are down on the deck. The wind is too high to stand. The boarding lines have snapped. I repeat, the lines are gone. The tension of the physical boarding had been broken by the violence of the weather. The ropes that had tethered the Iranian boat to the submarine had been shredded by the sudden surge of the sea. The two vessels were no longer locked together. They were being pushed apart by waves that were now 6 feet high and climbing. On the bridge of the lead Iranian boat, Lieutenant Reza was blind. The radar screen was a solid mass of green interference. The sand was so thick that the radar pulses could not penetrate the wall of dust. Reza spoke to his pilot. "Back off. Move to a safe distance. We are going to collide with the submarine. We cannot see where they are." The pilot responded. "I cannot maintain a heading. The wind is pushing us toward the rocks. We must turn into the waves or we will capsize." Reza looked at his boarding team. They were huddled on the deck, covered in fine silt. The opportunity to board was gone. The mission had shifted from a capture to a struggle for survival. Reza spoke into his radio. "Eagle 1. This is Guardian 1. We have lost contact with the target. The storm is too severe. We are maneuvering for safety. Confirm instructions." The shore commander at Bandar Abbas was looking at a blank screen. His long-range sensors were blinded by the atmospheric interference. The political momentum of the standoff had been halted by a wall of sand. The shore commander responded. "Guardian 1. Acknowledge. Move to 5 miles offshore. Do not lose the general coordinate. We will resume the intercept when the wind drops." Inside the Albany, the atmosphere was different. The silence of the deep had been replaced by the roar of the storm transmitted through the steel skin. But in the engineering space, the Master Chief saw an opportunity. The Master Chief spoke to the control room. "Captain, engineering. The vibration from the storm has shifted the hull. The pressure on the main shaft has changed. We are seeing a drop in the torque required to move the gears. We might be able to break them loose now." Vance felt a spark of hope. "Do it. Use every bit of hydraulic pressure you have. We need to get under this storm." The pivot had arrived. The weather had granted them a window of chaos. Both sides were now fighting the ocean instead of each other. The question was, who would recover first? 5:40 in the morning. The engineering space of the USS Albany was a furnace. The Master Chief stood over the main reduction gears. He held a massive hydraulic jack against the housing. The storm outside was shaking the entire 7,000-ton hull. Every time a heavy swell hit the submarine, the steel groaned. To the engineers, this was not just noise. It was energy. The vibration of the storm was doing what their tools could not. It was loosening the fused metal. The hull is twisting in these waves. That is our leverage. When the next big swell hits, apply full pressure to the jack. We are going to break this weld. The technician wiped grease from his eyes. "Chief, if the shaft snaps, we are finished. We will never move again." "It is already broken," the Master Chief responded. "Now, here comes a big one. Push. Push it now." A massive wave slammed into the Albany. The ship rolled 15 degrees to port. Deep inside the machinery, there was a sound like a high-caliber rifle shot. A sharp, metallic crack echoed through the hull. The Master Chief looked at the pressure gauge. It had dropped to 0. The resistance was gone. The Master Chief keyed his headset. "Bridge. Engineering. We have a break. The main shaft is turning. I repeat, the shaft is free. We are shifting power to the auxiliary motor now." 6 o'clock in the morning. On the bridge of Guardian 1, Lieutenant Reza was fighting to keep his boat from capsizing. The Shamal had turned the Strait of Hormuz into a washing machine of sand and salt water. The wind was screaming at 55 knots. His radar display was a useless smear of green light. The atmospheric interference from the dust was too thick for the pulses to return a clear image. He had lost the submarine. Lieutenant Reza spoke to his pilot. "Stay on our current heading. We cannot be more than 2 miles from the American vessel. If the wind drops even slightly, I want a visual." The pilot struggled with the wheel. "Sir, the waves are 10 feet high. If we stay in this position, we risk being driven onto the rocks at Ras Al Khou. We must move further out to sea." Reza looked into the brown void. He felt the weight of failure. He had the Americans trapped. He had the lines on their hull. Then the desert had risen up to protect them. He knew that every minute of this storm was a minute the Americans were using to fix their ship. Reza responded, "Move us 2 miles south. We will hold a blocking position. They cannot submerge in this shallow water without moving forward." If they try to run, we will hear them on the sonar. 6:10 in the morning. Inside the Albany, Commander Vance felt the subtle change in the ship. The erratic wallowing had stopped. It was replaced by a faint, rhythmic pulse. It was the auxiliary propulsion motor. It was not powerful. It could only push the submarine at 5 knots, but 5 knots was enough to give the rudder authority. 5 knots was enough to steer. Vance spoke to the navigator. "Give me a course for deep water. We need to clear the 12-mile limit. How much depth do we have?" The navigator checked his charts. "We are in 45 meters of water, Captain. It is shallow, but we have enough room to put the sail under the surface." Vance looked at the monitor showing the security team on the sail. They were covered in brown silt. They looked like statues made of sand. Vance spoke to the officer of the deck. "Clear the bridge. Bring the security team inside. Secure the snorkel mast and the diesel. We are shifting to battery power. We are going to slip away in the middle of this mess." The order was executed with silent precision. The sailors scrambled down the hatch. The heavy steel lid slammed shut and was locked. The emergency diesel died, and the loud thrumming stopped. The only sound left was the whine of the electric motor. The Albany began to move. It was slow, it was ponderous, but it was no longer a log. It was a predator again. 6:15 in the morning. The Strait of Hormuz. The USS Albany was no longer a surface vessel. Inside the control room, the red light had been replaced by a dim, cool blue. It was the color of a ship back in its element. The roar of the storm was muffled now, reduced to a distant, rhythmic thumping of waves against the upper sail. Commander Vance stood at the center of the room. He watched the depth gauge. 10 meters, 15 meters, 20 meters. Vance spoke to the diving officer. "Level off at 30 meters. We need to stay deep enough to avoid the surface turbulence, but shallow enough to keep an eye on the bottom." "What is our speed?" the diving officer responded. "Depth 30 meters. Leveling off now. Speed is 4.5 knots on the auxiliary motor. The trim is holding." The transition was a masterpiece of underwater seamanship. Without the main engines, the boat was sluggish. It handled like a loaded truck on an icy road. But it was moving. Most importantly, it was invisible. The thick layer of sand and silt in the water above acted as an acoustic blanket. It absorbed the noise of the small electric motor. It also blocked any visual or infrared sensors from the surface. 6:30 in the morning. High above the dust cloud, Major Hassan fought the controls of his P-3 Orion. The aircraft was being tossed like a toy by the thermal drafts of the Shamal. The cockpit windows were being sandblasted by the grit. He could hear the fine particles hitting the glass. His fuel state was reaching the point of no return. Hassan spoke into his radio. "Control, this is Major Hassan. I have lost all radar and visual contact with the target. The atmospheric interference is too high. My engines are ingesting dust. I am requesting permission to RTB." The shore controller in Bandar Abbas hesitated. He looked at the blank radar screens. "Major, can you confirm the last known position of the submarine?" Hassan responded. "Negative. They were snorkeling 10 minutes ago. Now there is nothing. They have either submerged or the storm has swallowed them. I cannot stay in this air. I am losing engine performance." The controller knew the value of the aircraft. Permission granted. Return to base. Guardian 1 and 2 will maintain a surface patrol until the wind drops. 6:35 in the morning. On the surface, Lieutenant Reza was standing in the center of his bridge. He was covered in a fine layer of brown dust that had found its way through every seal in the boat. The waves were now 12 feet high. His small craft was taking a beating. He looked at his sonar display. It was a mess of surface noise. The sound of the waves hitting the hull was drowning out everything else. Reza spoke to his crew. "Deploy the towed array. We need to listen below the surface layer." The sonar tech shook his head. "Sir, if we deploy the array in this sea state, the cable will snap. The turbulence is too high. We are blind and we are deaf." Reza stared into the brown void. He knew the Americans were gone. They had used the chaos of the desert to slip back into the deep. He felt a strange mix of frustration and relief. The pressure to board the submarine was gone. The risk of a war starting on his deck had evaporated with the wind. 6:45 in the morning. Inside the Albany, Petty Officer Miller sat in the sonar shack. He was focused. He was looking for the signature of the Iranian fast boats. He found them. They were fading. The high-pitched whine of their propellers was moving north toward the shelter of the coast. Miller spoke to the bridge. Bridge, sonar. Surface contacts are moving away, bearing 010. They are opening the range. I believe they have lost us in the sea return. Commander Vance let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 4 hours. He looked at the navigator. Position. The navigator pointed to the digital map. The green icon was moving slowly but steadily. It was crossing a dotted white line on the screen. The navigator responded. Captain, we have just cleared the 12-mile limit. We are back in international waters. Vance nodded. Very well. Maintain current heading and depth. We are going to crawl until we are 50 miles out. Then we will wait for the tow ship. The Albany moved through the dark water. It was wounded and slow, but it was free. The immediate crisis had passed. The mechanical failure remained, but the political explosion had been averted. 9:15 in the morning, 50 miles south of the Strait of Hormuz. The Shamal had passed as quickly as it had arrived. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue. The air was still, but the scent of the desert remained. On the surface of the Arabian Sea, the USS Albany looked like a ghost. Its black hull was stained with streaks of brown silt. It sat high in the water, rolling gently, in the long, slow swells of the open ocean. The USS Salvor, a heavy-duty salvage and rescue ship, was positioned 500 meters off the Albany's bow. It was a utilitarian vessel, painted in haze gray. It had traveled at flank speed from its station in the Central Gulf to meet the disabled submarine. To the exhausted crew of the Albany, the sight of the American flag flying from the Salvor's mast was the end of a nightmare. Commander Vance stood on the bridge of the sail. He was wearing his foul weather gear, but his face was uncovered. He felt the sun on his skin for the first time in weeks. He looked toward the north. On the very edge of the horizon, a single white speck was visible. It was an Iranian patrol boat. It was an Iranian patrol boat. It was not approaching. It was simply watching from the safety of international waters. The captain of the Salvor spoke over the radio. Albany, Salvor, we are ready to pass the messenger line. Stand by on your forward deck. Commander Vance responded. Salvor, Albany, acknowledge. My deck team is in position. We are ready to receive the tow. On the forward deck of the Albany, 6 sailors worked with practiced efficiency. They were no longer carrying rifles. They were carrying heavy coils of rope. A pneumatic line thrower fired from the Salvor. A thin nylon cord arched through the air and landed across the submarine's casing. The sailors grabbed it immediately. They began to haul in the thicker messenger line, which was followed by the massive steel towing hawser. The work was heavy and dangerous. A submarine is not designed to be towed. There are no massive bits or winches on the deck. The sailors had to secure the cable to the main high-capacity cleat, a process that required brute strength and perfect timing. If the cable snapped under the tension of the waves, it could cut a man in half. Inside the control room, the atmosphere was professional but subdued. There were no cheers. There was no celebration. The crew was too tired for emotion. They had spent 12 hours fighting a mechanical failure and a geopolitical crisis simultaneously. They had held their breath while an armed boarding party stood 10 feet away. The Master Chief of the Watch looked at the engineering logs. The reactor was in a safe, low-power state. The batteries were charging. He closed the logbook and rubbed his eyes. The Master Chief spoke to the technician next to him. We kept the lights on. That is all that matters today. That is all that matters today. The technician nodded. Yes, Chief, we kept them on. 10:30 in the morning. The tow line went taut. The USS Salvor began to move forward. The heavy steel cable rose out of the water, dripping and vibrating under the strain. The Albany groaned as it felt the forward pull. Slowly, the 7,000-ton submarine began to follow the salvage ship. They were heading south, toward the deep water of the Indian Ocean. The Iranian patrol boat turned away. It increased speed and headed back toward the coast of Iran. The encounter was over. No shots had been fired. No blood had been spilled. In the official logs of both navies, the event would be recorded as a routine mechanical assistance in international waters. The truth of how close the world had come to a conflict would remain classified for decades. The Albany was moving at 6 knots. It was a long way from home, but it was under the protection of the fleet. 12 hours later, Manama, Bahrain. The combat power center was quiet. The primary displays had been cleared of the red threat zones. Admiral Jenkins stood before the glass wall of her office. She was reading the initial report from the commander of the Albany. The details were chilling. The proximity of the Iranian fast boats, the armed boarding party, the weapons locked from the shore. The data confirmed what she already suspected. The two nations had been 30 seconds away from a kinetic exchange. The admiral spoke to her aide. The weather was the only variable we did not account for. If that storm had arrived 5 minutes later, we would be in a shooting war. The margin for error was non-existent. The aide responded. The Iranians are already claiming a victory in their state media. They are saying they chased a nuclear intruder out of their waters. We are maintaining a policy of no comment. The official line is a routine mechanical escort. Jenkins nodded. Let them have the headlines. We have the boat, and we have the crew. 1 day later, Tehran, Iran. The Iranian admiral sat in a wood-paneled office overlooking the city. He was reviewing the high-definition video footage recovered from the fast boats. He saw the American sailors on the sail. They were calm. They were disciplined. He also saw his own boarding party. They were aggressive, perhaps too aggressive. He knew the ministry was already receiving angry calls from Washington through the Swiss back channel. The Americans were demanding an explanation for the boarding attempt on a vessel in distress. The admiral spoke to the foreign minister. The Americans will increase their presence in the strait now. They will call it a safety measure. Our move was justified by the location of the vessel, but it has changed the calculus for both sides. They know we can find them. We know they will not hesitate to defend themselves. The minister looked at the footage of the sandstorm. Nature ended the confrontation before we had to. We should not count on the wind next time. We need better protocols for these encounters. 3 days later, the island of Diego Garcia, the USS Albany, sat in the deep blue water of the lagoon. It was a tropical paradise, thousands of miles from the tension of the Gulf. Divers were already in the water. They were inspecting the external hull for any signs of contact or sabotage. Inside the machinery room, a team of forensic engineers from the United States examined the main reduction gears. They found a microscopic flaw in the casting of a single pinion gear. It was a manufacturing defect that had waited 5 years to fail. It was an accident of physics, not a plot by an enemy. The lead engineer spoke to Commander Vance. It was a 1 in a million failure. The alloy simply reached its fatigue limit. It happened at the worst possible coordinate, at the worst possible time. It was a freak occurrence. Vance looked at the silent turbines. In our business, there are no freak occurrences. There are only consequences. We were lucky. The commander knew that luck was a poor strategy for the future. The incident would be analyzed by every intelligence agency in the world. The Iranians had proven their ability to detect and intercept a stealthy target under optimal conditions. The Americans had proven their ability to maintain discipline under extreme pressure. Both sides had learned a lesson in the fragility of the peace in the Strait of Hormuz. The Albany would spend months in a dry dock. The gears would be replaced. The hull would be repainted. The brown silt of the Iranian coast would be scrubbed away. But the memory of those 10 minutes in the dark would remain with every man on the ship. 1 month later, 2:15 in the afternoon, the Pentagon. Inside a windowless briefing room, a group of senior analysts watched a looped recording from a drone. The grainy infrared footage showed the USS Albany as a dark shape in a brown sea. They watched the Iranian fast boats circle. They watched the flash of the strobe lights and the single burst of tracer fire into the air. The room was silent. These were the men and women who calculated the probability of war. They knew that the math had come out to zero only because of a sudden shift in the wind. A senior intelligence officer stood at the head of the table. He clicked a remote, and the screen froze on the image of the Iranian boarding party. Their grappling hooks were visible, snagged on the safety rail of the American submarine. The officer spoke to the assembled leaders. This was the closest we have come to a surface engagement in the Strait of Hormuz since the 1980s. The Iranians were not looking for a prize. If they had successfully boarded the Albany, we would have been forced to launch a recovery operation. That would have involved the carrier strike group. It would have meant a full-scale regional conflict. One of the generals leaned forward. And why did they stop? Was it our radio warnings? Was it the F-18 presence? The officer shook his head. No, the radio hails were ignored. The aircraft were out of position. They stopped because the Shamal dust storm made it physically impossible to stay attached to the hull. The weather acted as a neutral arbiter. It forced a separation when neither side was willing to back down. 6 weeks after the incident, 10 in the morning, Bandar Abbas, Iran. The Iranian Navy held its own debriefing in a similar room. The tone was different, but the conclusion was the same. They had proven that even the most advanced stealth technology was vulnerable to a mechanical failure in a narrow waterway. They had shown that their fast attack craft could intercept a nuclear submarine in minutes. The Iranian admiral spoke to his captains. The Americans are now transiting the strait with surface escorts for every submarine. They are showing their concern. We have changed their behavior without firing a single missile. This is the definition of a successful deterrent. One of the boat commanders, Lieutenant Reza, sat in the back of the room. He had a new medal on his uniform, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He remembered the blinding white strobes. He remembered the silent, motionless American sailors on the sail. He knew that the deterrent worked both ways. He had seen the discipline of a crew that was ready to die to protect their ship. He knew that if he had jumped onto that deck, he would not have returned to his boat. The present day, high noon. The Strait of Hormuz remains the most dangerous choke point in the world. On any given day, 20% of the world's petroleum passes through these narrow waters. Above the surface, the sun is hot and the sky is clear. Below the surface, the silent game of cat and mouse continues. The USS Albany is back on patrol. Its new reduction gears are silent. Its crew is more vigilant. They know that they are part of a delicate balance. Modern naval warfare is not always about the size of the fleet or the power of the missiles. Often, it is about the split-second decisions made by young men in the dark. It is about the restraint shown when every instinct screams for action. No missiles flew. No ships were lost. But history shifted on that Tuesday morning. When the line was crossed, both sides eventually chose professionalism over pride. In an era of high-tech weaponry and global tension, the greatest tool of the military is often the ability to avoid a fight that neither side can truly win. Modern warfare is decided not by who fires first, but by who chooses not to fire at all. The waters of the Gulf are blue again. The desert sand has settled. But the lesson of the Hormuz breach remains. The sea is a neutral territory, and it is a place where a single broken gear can bring the world to the brink of the end.